What would you do if a police dog refused to stop barking at you in front of an entire crowd of witnesses? What if that dog saw something in you that no human eye could detect? And what if the secret he was trying to expose was something you had buried for 50 years? This is the story of a decorated canine officer named Duke, an old man hiding in plain sight, and a mystery that spans generations. But be warned. Nothing in this story is what it seems. By the time you reach the end, you will understand why this dog refused to stay silent, and why his reason has left millions of viewers in tears. This story will change the way you see loyalty forever. But before we dive into this incredible journey, I need you to do something important. If you believe in the unbreakable bond between humans and animals, subscribe to this channel right now and turn on that notification bell so you never miss stories like this one. Leave a comment below and tell me what you think is the strongest bond you have ever witnessed between a human and an animal. And if this story touches your heart, hit that like button because your support helps these powerful stories reach more people who need to hear them. Now, let us begin. It was a crisp Saturday morning in Cedar Falls, Iowa. The kind of morning where golden sunlight spills through autumn leaves and the air smells like fresh coffee and possibility. A gentle breeze carried the scent of pancakes and maple syrup through the streets, and the town buzzed with quiet excitement. Officer Marcus Thompson adjusted his uniform and smiled as he led his canine partner, a 4-year-old German Shepherd named Duke, toward the Riverside Community Center. The building stood proudly on the corner of Oak Avenue and 3rd Street, its red brick walls decorated with patriotic banners and yellow ribbons. Today was supposed to be simple. Today was supposed to be heartwarming. Today was supposed to be one of those easy assignments that reminded Marcus why he loved serving his community. The community center was hosting its annual Veterans Appreciation Breakfast, a beloved tradition that brought together heroes from every generation. Dozens of elderly veterans filled the hall that morning, men and women who had served their country with honor and sacrifice. Some wore their old uniforms, medals gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Others sat in wheelchairs, their bodies weakened by age but their spirits still burning bright. Children from Jefferson Elementary School clutched handmade thank you cards decorated with red, white, and blue crayon drawings. Their excited chatter filled the room as teachers organized them into neat lines, preparing for the presentation ceremony that would make the evening news. Volunteers in matching red aprons moved between tables, serving scrambled eggs, crispy bacon, golden pancakes, and bottomless cups of hot coffee. A local news crew from Channel 7 had set up cameras near the stage, the reporter practicing her lines about hometown heroes and community spirit. The room buzzed with laughter and gratitude. Old friends embraced. Stories of courage passed between generations. The atmosphere was warm, welcoming, and filled with love. Everything was perfect. Until it was not. Marcus noticed Duke's body language change the very moment they stepped through the double doors. It was subtle at first, something only a handler who had spent 3 years bonded with his partner would recognize. Duke's ears rotated forward, standing at full attention. His nostrils flared rhythmically, processing scents with that incredible canine brain. His muscles tensed beneath his sleek black and tan coat. "Easy, boy," Marcus murmured, instinctively tightening his grip on the leather leash. "We are just here to meet some veterans and make the kids smile. Nothing to worry about." But Duke was not listening. His amber eyes, usually warm and gentle during community events, had locked onto something across the crowded room. His body oriented like a compass needle pointing north, completely fixated on a single point in the distance. Marcus followed his partner's gaze. In the far corner of the community center, near the emergency exit door, sat an old man in a wheelchair. He was completely alone at a small table, separated from the clusters of socializing veterans. His shoulders were hunched beneath a faded army jacket that looked like it had survived decades of wear. Thin, trembling hands lifted a white coffee cup to weathered lips. His skin was pale and papery, stretched over prominent cheekbones. A simple paper name tag was pinned to his chest. It read Walter Jenkins. He looked like any other elderly veteran. Quiet. Humble. Perhaps a little lonely. There was nothing threatening about him. Nothing suspicious. He was just an old man trying to enjoy a cup of coffee at a community breakfast. But Duke saw something else entirely. And what happened next would haunt everyone in that room for years to come. Without any warning, Duke lunged forward with explosive force. His bark shattered the peaceful atmosphere like a gunshot fired in a library. The sound was deafening, primal, filled with an urgency that made every head in the room snap toward the commotion. This was not a normal bark. Marcus had heard Duke bark thousands of times during training exercises, suspect apprehensions, and detection work. He knew every sound in his partner's vocabulary. This bark was different. This was desperate. This was urgent. This was frantic. This was the kind of bark Duke only used when he detected immediate danger or when he found someone who was lost and desperately needed help. "Duke, heel," Marcus commanded, yanking the leash with both hands and planting his feet against the linoleum floor. But Duke would not stop. 70 pounds of muscle and determination strained against the leash with every ounce of strength in his powerful body. His claws scraped and scratched against the polished floor, leaving marks in the surface. Saliva flew from his jaws as he barked again and again, the sound echoing off the walls and ceiling. His eyes never left the old man in the wheelchair. Not for a single second. Not even to blink. The entire room fell silent except for Duke's relentless barking. Forks clattered onto plates. Conversations died mid-sentence. Children clutched their teachers in fear, some beginning to cry. The elderly veterans exchanged uneasy glances, their trained instincts sensing that something was terribly wrong. The news camera swung toward the commotion, the red recording light blinking steadily. And Walter Jenkins, the frail old man in the corner, slowly raised his head. His weathered face had gone completely pale. Pale as a ghost who had just watched his past walk through the door. His coffee cup trembled violently in his grip, dark liquid sloshing over the rim and staining the white tablecloth. His faded blue eyes, clouded with age but suddenly sharp with something unreadable, met Duke's wild amber gaze. And something passed between them. Something invisible. Something ancient. Something that made absolutely no logical sense. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine, and he did not understand why. Was it fear he saw in the old man's eyes? Was it guilt? Or was it something else entirely? Was it recognition? That was impossible. Duke had never met this man before. Marcus was certain of it. They had lived in Cedar Falls for 3 years, and Walter Jenkins had only moved to town 8 months ago. So why was Duke acting like he had just found someone he had been searching for his entire life? And why did Walter Jenkins look like he had just seen a ghost rise from the grave? It took 3 officers to help Marcus pull Duke outside. Even then, the dog would not calm down. He scratched at the glass doors with desperate claws, leaving marks on the surface. He paced back and forth on the concrete sidewalk, his tail tucked low between his legs, his eyes constantly darting toward the building. Every few seconds, he would let out a long, mournful whimper that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his soul. Marcus knelt beside his partner on the cold pavement, his heart pounding in his chest. He placed both hands on Duke's face, trying to get the dog to focus on him instead of the community center doors. "Easy, boy. Easy. What is going on with you?" But Duke would not meet his eyes. The dog kept staring at those doors like his life depended on getting back inside. Like there was someone in that building who needed him more than anything in the world. Marcus had never seen anything like this. Not once in 3 years of working together. Not during the most intense drug busts. Not during the most dangerous suspect pursuits. Not even during the search and rescue missions that pushed them both to their physical and emotional limits. Duke was the most disciplined, most reliable, most professional canine partner any officer could ask for. So what had just happened in there? Marcus stood up slowly and looked back through the glass doors. He could see the old man in the wheelchair still sitting in the corner. Walter Jenkins had not moved from his spot, but his coffee cup sat abandoned on the table. His hands were gripping the armrests of his wheelchair so tightly that Marcus could see his knuckles turning white even from this distance. Something was very wrong. And Marcus needed to understand what it was. You see, Duke was not always a hero. He was not always the confident, decorated police canine that the Cedar Falls community had come to know and trust. There was a time when Duke was broken beyond repair, when nobody believed he could ever become anything more than a traumatized rescue dog waiting for death. 3 years ago, Duke had been pulled from a nightmare. An illegal breeding operation outside Davenport, Iowa had been running for years without detection. The property was hidden deep in the countryside, surrounded by cornfields and accessible only by a single dirt road. When animal control officers finally raided the facility based on an anonymous tip, what they found inside made several of them break down in tears. Dozens of dogs were crammed into filthy wire cages stacked 3 high. The animals were malnourished, covered in sores, and living in their own waste. Many had never seen sunlight. Many had never felt a gentle human touch. Duke was the only survivor from his litter. His siblings had died from disease, neglect, and starvation. When the rescue team found Duke, he was cowering in the back corner of a rusty cage, ribs showing through his dull coat, eyes filled with terror. He growled at anyone who came near. He snapped at hands that tried to help him. The veterinarians at the emergency animal hospital did not think Duke would survive the night. He was severely dehydrated, riddled with parasites, and suffering from infections that had gone untreated for months. But somehow, against all odds, Duke held on. The shelter workers called him unadoptable. They said he was too damaged, too traumatized, too aggressive to ever trust humans again. There was talk of putting him down simply because no one believed he could ever be rehabilitated. That was when Marcus Thompson walked into the shelter. Marcus had been looking for a new canine partner after his previous dog, a Belgian Malinois named Rex, had retired due to hip problems. The department had sent him to evaluate several candidates at shelters across the state, hoping to find a diamond in the rough. The moment Marcus saw Duke, something changed. The dog was huddled in the far corner of his kennel, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. His body trembled with fear. His coat was patchy and dull. He looked like a creature that had given up on life entirely. But when Marcus knelt down outside the kennel and spoke softly, something shifted in Duke's eyes. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A tiny flicker of curiosity. A brief moment of connection. Marcus saw potential in those amber eyes. He saw loyalty waiting to be earned. He saw a desperate need to be loved and trusted again. He took Duke home that night. The first few months were incredibly difficult. Duke flinched at sudden movements. He refused to eat if anyone watched him. He would wake up in the middle of the night howling from nightmares that Marcus could only imagine. But Marcus never gave up on him. Slowly, patiently, with endless compassion and consistency, Marcus earned Duke's trust. Day by day, week by week, month by month, the broken rescue dog transformed into something extraordinary. Duke graduated from the Iowa State Canine Academy at the top of his class. He earned certifications in narcotics detection, suspect apprehension, and search and rescue. He became the most decorated police dog in Cedar Falls history. In 3 years of service, Duke had located missing children lost in cornfields during harvest season. He had detected hidden drugs in vehicles that human officers never would have suspected. He had once alerted the team to a gas leak in an apartment complex, saving 37 residents from a potential explosion. Duke had never been wrong. Duke had never made a mistake. Duke had never barked without a legitimate reason. So why was he so fixated on a frail old man in a wheelchair? That question burned in Marcus's mind as he walked back inside the community center, leaving Duke with a fellow officer who promised to keep the dog calm. Marcus needed answers. He approached Eleanor Price, the silver-haired director of the community center who had been running these events for over 20 years. She was standing near the coffee station, looking shaken by what had just transpired. "Ma'am, can I ask you a few questions about one of your guests?" Eleanor nodded slowly, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea for warmth. "Of course, officer." That was quite a scene. "Is your dog all right?" "He will be fine." Marcus glanced toward the corner where Walter Jenkins still sat alone. "But I need to know more about that gentleman over there. The one in the wheelchair." Walter Jenkins. Eleanor followed his gaze, and her expression softened with something that looked like sadness mixed with concern. "Walter? Oh, he is a sweet man. Very quiet. He moved here about 8 months ago. Keeps to himself mostly. Lives alone in that little blue house on Maple Street. Does he have any family? Anyone who visits?" Eleanor shook her head slowly. "None that I know of. No visitors. No phone calls. He comes to these events alone and leaves alone. He donates to the food drive every month, always cash, always anonymous. Never wants any recognition." She paused and stirred her tea absently. "But there is something about him, officer. Something I cannot quite explain." Marcus leaned closer. "What do you mean?" Eleanor set down her spoon and looked directly into Marcus's eyes. "Something sad. Like he is carrying a weight that is too heavy for one person. Like he is running from something. Or maybe running from someone." She glanced back at Walter Jenkins. "That man has secrets, officer. I do not know what they are, but I have been around long enough to recognize when someone is hiding from their past." Marcus felt his instincts sharpen. The same instincts that had served him well for 12 years on the force. The same instincts that told him when something was not right. Duke had sensed something in that old man. Something invisible to human eyes but obvious to a dog's extraordinary senses. And Marcus was determined to find out what it was. That night, after his shift ended, Marcus sat alone in his home office with Duke sleeping restlessly at his feet. The computer screen glowed in the darkness as Marcus did something that bent the rules of proper procedure. He ran a background check on Walter Jenkins. He typed the name into the law enforcement database and pressed enter. The results loaded. And what Marcus saw on that screen made his blood turn to ice. According to every official database, Walter Jenkins did not exist before 2019. No birth certificate. No social security history prior to 5 years ago. No employment records. No tax filings. No military service documentation despite the army jacket he wore. It was as if the man had simply materialized out of thin air. Everyone leaves a trail. Everyone has a past. Unless they are hiding from it. Who was Walter Jenkins really? And what secret was he so desperate to keep buried? Marcus could not sleep that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with questions that had no answers. Duke was curled up on the floor beside him, but even the dog seemed restless. Every few minutes, Duke would lift his head, ears perked, as if listening for something only he could hear. Who was Walter Jenkins? Why did he have no past before 2019? And why had Duke reacted to him like that? Marcus had seen his partner track criminals through miles of dense forest. He had watched Duke locate a missing child buried under debris after a tornado. He had witnessed the dog detect hidden compartments in vehicles that had fooled every human officer on the team. Duke's instincts were supernatural. His accuracy was unmatched. If Duke sensed something wrong about Walter Jenkins, then something was definitely wrong. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the station 2 hours before his shift started. He nodded at the night duty officer and made his way straight to the records room. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as he pulled out files and booted up the older database systems that connected to national law enforcement networks. He was going to find out who this man really was, no matter how long it took. Marcus started with the basics. He pulled up the photograph from Walter Jenkins' Iowa driver's license, which had been issued just 8 months ago. The picture showed an elderly man with sharp blue eyes, weathered skin, and a distinctive scar above his left eyebrow. The scar was old, faded to a thin white line, but still clearly visible. That scar was unusual. Memorable. The kind of identifying mark that would show up in other records if this man had ever existed under a different name. Marcus began cross-referencing the photograph against missing persons databases across the country. He filtered by age, physical description, and distinguishing features. He expanded his search to include cold cases from the past decade. For 3 hours, he found nothing. Dead end after dead end. False match after false match. The man who called himself Walter Jenkins seemed to have appeared from nowhere, like a ghost who had decided to become human. Marcus was about to give up when a single result appeared at the bottom of his screen. It was a missing persons report from Oakdale, Minnesota. Filed in November 2019. The case had gone cold years ago, but it remained open because no body had ever been found and the family refused to stop searching. Marcus clicked on the file. A photograph filled his screen. His heart stopped. The man in the photo was younger, perhaps in his mid-60s, but the resemblance was unmistakable. The same sharp blue eyes that seemed to carry decades of pain. The same prominent cheekbones. The same thin lips pressed together in an expression of quiet sorrow. And there, above the left eyebrow, was the same distinctive scar. Marcus leaned closer to the screen, his pulse pounding in his ears. He read the name attached to the file. Thomas Edward Greer. That was his real name. Not Walter Jenkins. Thomas Edward Greer. According to the report, Thomas had vanished without a trace in November 2019, exactly 3 weeks after the death of his wife, Margaret Ann Greer, who had lost her battle with cancer after 18 months of treatment. Thomas and Margaret had been married for 47 years. They had one daughter together, a woman named Sarah Greer Collins, who was now 53 years old and living in Minneapolis with her husband and 2 teenage children. Sarah was the one who had filed the missing persons report. Marcus read her statement, which had been taken by Oakdale police just days after her father disappeared. He was devastated after Mom died. They had been together since high school. She was his whole world. After the funeral, he stopped eating. He stopped sleeping. He would just sit in his chair and stare at the wall for hours. I tried to get him to come live with us. I tried to get him help. But he kept saying he needed to be alone. He kept saying he did not want to be a burden. Then one morning, I went to check on him, and he was gone. His car was at the bus station. His bank accounts were emptied. He did not leave a note. He did not say goodbye. I have been looking for him for 5 years. I will never stop looking. I just need to know that my father is alive. I just need to know that he is okay. Marcus felt a lump forming in his throat as he continued reading. The report contained extensive background information on Thomas Greer. He had been born in 1950 in Rochester, Minnesota. He had graduated from Rochester High School in 1968. He had been drafted into the United States Army just 3 months after graduation. And that was when Marcus saw something that made his hands start to tremble. Under occupation, the report listed Thomas Greer's military service. United States Army. Vietnam War. 1968 to 1971. Military occupational specialty, dog handler. Marcus stared at those words. Dog handler. Thomas Greer had been a military dog handler in Vietnam. He scrolled down further, searching for more details about Thomas's service record. The information was limited, as many Vietnam-era records had been lost or classified over the years. But there were a few notes that had been added to the file by investigators who had tried to locate Thomas after his disappearance. One note in particular caught Marcus's attention. Subject appears to suffer from severe post-traumatic stress disorder stemming from combat experiences in Vietnam. According to family members, subject has experienced nightmares, flashbacks, and episodes of depression for decades. Subject has stated on multiple occasions that losing his service dog was, quote, the worst day of his life, end quote. Subject was extremely bonded with his military canine partner and has reportedly never fully recovered from the loss. Marcus felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He scrolled down to find any additional information about Thomas Greer's service dog. There had to be more details somewhere. A name. A description. Something that would explain why Duke had reacted so intensely to this man. And then he found it. At the very bottom of the file, someone had added a handwritten note that had been scanned into the digital record. It was dated 2019, written by the original investigating officer who had interviewed Sarah Greer Collins. The note read, "Daughter provided additional details about father's military service. Subject served 2 tours in Vietnam as a handler for a German Shepherd working dog. Subject maintained correspondence with fellow veterans until wife's death. Subject kept photographs of military dog in bedroom until disappearance. Photographs were not among items left behind. Name of military service dog, Duke." Marcus pushed back from his desk so hard that his chair nearly tipped over. His hands were shaking uncontrollably. His mind was spinning with implications that seemed impossible to accept. Duke. The dog's name was Duke. The same name as his own canine partner. The same breed. The same connection to a man who had spent his entire life haunted by the loss of his best friend. This could not be a coincidence. The universe did not work that way. There had to be a connection, a thread linking these 2 dogs across 50 years of history. But how was that possible? His Duke was only 4 years old. He had been born in an illegal breeding operation in Iowa and rescued just 3 years ago. The original Duke, Thomas Greer's Vietnam War dog, would have died decades ago. So why had his Duke reacted to Thomas like he was seeing a long-lost family member? Why had the dog lunged toward this old man with such desperate urgency? And why had Thomas looked at Duke with recognition in his eyes, as if he was seeing a ghost from another lifetime? Marcus knew there was only one way to find answers. He needed to look into Duke's history. Not just the rescue. Not just the training. He needed to go deeper than anyone had ever gone before. He needed to find out where Duke really came from. And when he did, what he discovered would change everything he thought he knew about his partner, his purpose, and the unbreakable bonds that connect souls across generations. But that discovery would come with a price. Because some secrets are buried for a reason. And some truths, once uncovered, can never be forgotten. Marcus barely slept that night. He sat at his kitchen table with Duke's entire rescue file spread out before him like pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit together. Coffee grew cold in his mug. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, then 1, then 2 in the morning, but Marcus could not stop searching. Duke lay at his feet, occasionally lifting his head to watch his handler with those intelligent amber eyes. It was as if the dog knew something important was happening. As if he understood that Marcus was searching for answers to questions that had never been asked. The rescue file contained the basic information Marcus already knew. Duke had been pulled from an illegal breeding operation outside Davenport, Iowa on March 15, 3 years ago. He had been the only survivor from his litter. He had been malnourished, traumatized, and considered unadoptable by shelter standards. But there was something Marcus had never noticed before. At the very back of the file, tucked behind veterinary records and vaccination certificates, was a single sheet of paper that looked older than the rest. It was a photocopy of what appeared to be a handwritten note, barely legible and faded with age. Marcus held the paper up to the desk lamp and squinted at the cramped writing. The note was from the veterinarian who had first examined Duke after the rescue. Dr. Patricia Hoffman from the Davenport Emergency Animal Hospital. Marcus had met her once during Duke's adoption process, but he had never seen this particular document before. The note read, "This dog displays unusual characteristics that warrant further investigation. Physical markers and behavioral patterns suggest documented military bloodline. Genetic testing recommended but not performed due to budget constraints. Notable observations include response to military-style hand signals not taught at this facility. Dog demonstrates knowledge of tactical positioning and threat assessment beyond typical canine behavior. Possible connection to Vietnam-era military breeding program based on distinctive markings and temperament. Recommend contacting Department of Defense K9 Genealogy Archive if resources allow." Note: anonymous caller who reported the breeding operation specifically asked about this dog's condition. Caller had detailed knowledge of the bloodline. Identity unknown. Marcus read the note 3 times, his heart pounding harder with each pass. Anonymous caller. Detailed knowledge of the bloodline. Specifically asked about this dog. Could it have been Thomas Greer who made that call? Had he been tracking Duke's lineage even before the rescue? Marcus turned to his laptop and began searching for information about military dog breeding programs from the Vietnam era. Most of the records were classified or lost, but he found fragments of information scattered across veteran forums and military history websites. During the Vietnam War, the United States military had operated extensive dog training programs. German Shepherds were the preferred breed for their intelligence, loyalty, and adaptability to harsh conditions. These dogs served as scouts, sentries, trackers, and companions to soldiers in the most dangerous environments imaginable. When the war ended, most of the military dogs were left behind in Vietnam, considered equipment rather than veterans. But some handlers, devastated by the loss of their partners, had managed to bring home puppies or arranged for bloodlines to be continued in the United States. These bloodlines were carefully tracked by a small network of veterans who believed the dogs deserved to have their legacy preserved. Marcus found a website dedicated to Vietnam War dogs. It contained a database of known military dogs and their handlers, compiled by veterans over decades of research. He typed Duke into the search bar. 17 results appeared. He scrolled through them until he found one that made him stop breathing. Duke. Serial number 76A9. German Shepherd. Handler, Specialist Thomas E. Greer. Served 1969 to 1971. Killed in action, December 12, 1971. Saved handler's life during ambush near Da Nang. There was a black and white photograph attached to the entry. It showed a young soldier, barely out of his teens, kneeling beside a German Shepherd in what looked like a jungle clearing. The soldier's hand rested on the dog's head. Both were looking directly at the camera with expressions of absolute trust and devotion. The soldier was unmistakably a younger version of Thomas Greer, and the dog looked exactly like the Duke sleeping at Marcus's feet. Not similar. Not reminiscent. Exactly the same. The markings, the stance, the intelligent eyes. If Marcus had not known better, he would have sworn it was the same dog photographed 50 years apart. Marcus scrolled down and found additional notes about the original Duke. Exceptional service record. Detected over 200 ambushes. Saved countless lives. Bloodline preserved through emergency breeding program before deployment. Puppies sent to Fort Benning, Georgia in 1969. Descendants believed to be in civilian breeding programs. Marcus's hands were trembling as he opened a new search window. He typed in Fort Benning German Shepherd Breeding Program 1969. A single result appeared. It was a declassified military document from 1970 describing an experimental program to preserve the bloodlines of exceptional military dogs. The program had been discontinued in 1975, but not before several generations of puppies had been placed with civilian breeders across the country. The document contained a list of participating breeders. Marcus scanned the list, looking for any connections to Iowa. And there it was. Henderson Farms, Davenport, Iowa. Received 2 puppies from Duke bloodline in 1973. Henderson Farms. Marcus knew that name. It had been in the news 3 years ago. It was the location of the illegal breeding operation where Duke had been rescued. The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together, forming a picture that seemed too incredible to be real. The facility where Duke had been rescued was the same farm that had received puppies from the original Duke's bloodline 50 years ago. Generations of dogs had been bred there, carrying the genetic legacy of a Vietnam War hero. And somehow, Thomas Greer had known about it. He had been tracking the bloodline of his beloved partner for decades. He had made the anonymous call that led to the rescue. He had moved to Cedar Falls just to be near the descendant of his lost friend. But there was still one question that made no sense. How had Duke recognized Thomas? How had a dog with no direct contact with Thomas Greer known exactly who he was? Marcus was pondering this question when his phone suddenly rang, shattering the pre-dawn silence. The caller ID showed the dispatch center. "Marcus, we have a situation," the dispatcher said, her voice tense with urgency. "There has been a break-in at 342 Maple Street." Marcus felt his blood run cold. That was Thomas Greer's address. The homeowner called it in himself, the dispatcher continued. "He says he is not hurt, but he is asking specifically for you. He says it is about your dog. He says you need to come immediately." Marcus was already grabbing his keys and badge. Duke had jumped to his feet, sensing the urgency. "He also said something else," the dispatcher added, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "He said to tell you that he knows you have been investigating him. And he has something you need to see. Something about Duke that changes everything." Marcus's heart was racing as he loaded Duke into the patrol car and switched on the sirens. What could Thomas Greer possibly have that would change everything? What secret had he been hiding in that little blue house? And why had someone broken in to try to find it? As Marcus raced through the empty streets toward Maple Street, he had no idea that what he was about to discover would not just explain Duke's reaction at the community center. It would reveal a truth so profound, so impossible, that it would rewrite everything he believed about the bond between humans and dogs. But someone else wanted that truth to stay buried. And they were willing to do anything to keep it secret. Marcus arrived at 342 Maple Street with his siren silent and lights off. Something about the situation felt wrong. If there had been a break-in, where were the other patrol cars? Where was the crime scene tape? Why was the small blue house sitting in darkness except for a single light glowing in the front window? Duke was pacing anxiously in the back of the patrol car, whimpering softly. Marcus had never seen him this agitated before a call. It was as if the dog could sense that something monumental was about to happen. "Stay here, boy," Marcus whispered, leaving Duke in the vehicle as he approached the front door. The door was slightly open, hanging off one hinge as if someone had forced their way inside. Marcus drew his service weapon and pushed the door open with his foot. "Thomas? Mr. Greer? Cedar Falls Police. Are you all right?" In here, a weak voice called from the living room. "Please, come in. And bring Duke with you. He needs to be here for this." Marcus hesitated. Protocol demanded he clear the house first, ensure there were no threats. But something in Thomas's voice made him holster his weapon and return to the car for Duke. The moment Duke entered the house, he went straight to Thomas, who was sitting in his wheelchair in the middle of the ransacked living room. Books were scattered across the floor. Furniture was overturned. Someone had been searching for something desperately. But Thomas was holding a worn leather journal against his chest, and he was smiling through tears that streaked down his weathered face. "They did not find it," he whispered. "They did not understand where I would hide something so precious." Marcus looked around the destroyed room. "Who did this? Are you hurt? Should I call an ambulance?" Thomas shook his head slowly. "No ambulance. No backup. I do not have much time, and you need to hear this. All of it. The truth about Duke. The truth about why he recognized me. The truth about a promise I made 50 years ago." Duke had laid his head on Thomas's lap, and the old man's trembling hand stroked the dog's fur gently, as if he was touching a memory made real. Thomas opened the journal, revealing pages filled with meticulous notes, photographs, breeding records, and genealogy charts that spanned 5 decades. "When my Duke died in my arms in Vietnam, he looked at me with those amber eyes, and I swore to him that I would find his family. I promised I would protect his bloodline forever. At the time, I thought I was just comforting a dying friend. I had no idea that promise would consume the rest of my life." Thomas turned a page, showing Marcus a faded military document. "Before we deployed to Vietnam, Duke had been part of an experimental breeding program. The military knew these dogs were exceptional, so they preserved the bloodlines. Duke had sired a litter of puppies just weeks before we shipped out. Those puppies were sent to Fort Benning, then distributed to trusted breeders across the country." He pointed to an entry in the journal. "I spent 30 years tracking every single one of those puppies. Their children. Their grandchildren. I used my pension, my savings, everything I had to keep track of them. Most of the bloodlines died out or were lost. But one survived in Iowa. At Henderson Farms." Marcus felt his heart pounding. "The illegal breeding operation." Thomas nodded. 5 years ago, I discovered Henderson Farms had been turned into a puppy mill. They were destroying Duke's legacy, treating his descendants like products instead of the heroes they were born to be. I could not let that happen." Thomas looked directly at Duke, and fresh tears spilled down his cheeks. "I knew one of Duke's descendants was there. I could feel it. So I made the anonymous call. I made sure the rescue happened. And then I watched from a distance as you adopted him, Marcus. I watched you save him the way I could not save the original Duke." "But that does not explain how he recognized you," Marcus said softly. Thomas smiled and pulled out a small sealed envelope from the journal. It was yellowed with age and marked with official military stamps. "This is what they were looking for tonight. The people who broke in. There are collectors who pay fortunes for Vietnam War memorabilia, especially anything connected to the military dog program. But this is not for sale. This is for Duke." Thomas opened the envelope carefully and pulled out a small piece of fabric. It was a collar tag, worn and faded, with the number 76A9 barely visible. This was the original Duke's collar tag, the one he wore when he died. "I have kept it all these years, carried it everywhere I went. It still carries his scent, Marcus. 50 years later, and it still smells like him." Thomas held the tag out toward Duke, who immediately began sniffing it intently. The dog's entire body went rigid, then began trembling. A long mournful howl escaped from deep within his chest, a sound of recognition and grief and joy all mixed together. "Dogs can detect scents we cannot even imagine," Thomas continued. "They can smell fear, illness, even emotions. And some scents, the important ones, they pass down through generations. Mother dogs teach their puppies what is dangerous and what is safe through scent markers. It becomes part of their genetic memory." Thomas placed the collar tag in Marcus's hand. "Your Duke carries the genetic memory of my Duke. When he saw me at the community center, when he smelled me, something deep in his DNA recognized the scent of the man his ancestor had loved. He knew I was family. He knew I was the one his great-great-grandfather had died protecting." Marcus could not speak. The weight of this revelation was overwhelming. "But there is more," Thomas said, his voice growing weaker. "I do not have long, Marcus. The cancer that took Margaret has been growing in me too. The doctors gave me 6 months, and that was 8 months ago. I am living on borrowed time." He reached out and gripped Marcus's hand with surprising strength. "I need you to make me a promise. The same promise I made to Duke 50 years ago. Promise me you will protect his legacy. Promise me you will make sure his story is never forgotten. Promise me that Duke's children and grandchildren will always have someone watching over them." Marcus felt tears burning in his eyes. "I promise, sir. I swear it." Thomas smiled and leaned back in his wheelchair, exhaustion overtaking him. "There is one more thing. In my will, I have left everything to the Cedar Falls Police K-9 unit. The house, my savings, everything. But more importantly, I have left you this journal. It contains the location of every living descendant of the original Duke. There are 17 dogs across the country carrying his bloodline. They all deserve to know their heritage. They all deserve to be heroes." 3 weeks later, Thomas Edward Greer passed away peacefully in his sleep. His daughter Sarah was by his side, having forgiven him completely for his disappearance. She understood now that sometimes love makes us do things that seem wrong but come from the purest intentions. At his funeral, Duke stood guard beside the casket, wearing a special collar that bore both his badge number and the original Duke's tag from Vietnam. 7 other German shepherds from Duke's bloodline were brought by their handlers from across the country, all standing in silent tribute to the man who had protected their ancestry. The story made national news. The Vietnam Veterans Association created a memorial for all military dogs who served and died overseas. Duke became the face of a new program that rescued and trained dogs from troubled backgrounds, giving them purpose and dignity. But the most remarkable thing happened 6 months after Thomas's death. Duke's companion at the K-9 unit, a female German shepherd named Liberty, gave birth to a litter of puppies. The first puppy born, a male with distinctive markings above his left eye, was named Thomas. And when Marcus held that puppy for the first time, he could have sworn he saw something familiar in those amber eyes. Something that transcended time and death. Something that proved love never really dies. It just finds new ways to live on. The bond between humans and dogs is more than just companionship. It is a covenant written in loyalty, sealed with devotion, and preserved through generations. Thomas Greer kept his promise to a dog who died saving his life. Marcus Thompson now carries that same promise forward. And somewhere in heaven, 2 dogs named Duke are standing side by side, tails wagging, knowing that their legacy will never be forgotten. Some promises echo through eternity. Some bonds cannot be broken by death. And some stories deserve to be shared with the world. If this story touched your heart, if you felt the power of the bond between Thomas and Duke, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. We share these incredible true stories every week. Leave a comment below and tell us about a time when an animal showed you loyalty beyond explanation. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that love never truly dies. And remember, every dog has a story worth telling. Every veteran carries invisible wounds that deserve our compassion. And sometimes, the greatest acts of love are the ones that span generations. Until next time, this is Heart of a Dog, reminding you that the best stories are the ones that prove love is stronger than time itself.